Oh, brother. All right, is that working okay? So for anybody who's wondering if I'm an actual librarian, I'll let you decide for yourself. I have a huge tattoo that runs the length of my spine that is a stack of books with the Dewey Decimal numbers on them. And I am wearing Moby Dick cufflinks. So judge for yourself. For anybody who wants to know if I'm actually the strongest, come and get it. If you want to prove you're better, we can figure out a way to do it. I spent a lot of 2013 working at the library in Salt Lake City, which is still my job, and out on book tour. I gave a ton of talks. And when you are out and you open it up for questions, I hope you authors will agree, you never know. So I started making this big list of the most memorable things people would say to me. And the most memorable thing that wasn't a question was a lady who stood up and said, "I don't have a question, but I wanted to tell you you're even more handsome than Nelson Mandela." So I love compliments, gimme. I'd never heard anyone refer to Nelson Mandela's looks. When I wrote down all of the questions people had asked me, what I was most interested in was the most common questions. I'm going to talk briefly about 3 or 4 of those today. The most common question I get, probably, is, "What's your story about?" Indeed. It looks weird. It's weirder than you think. My goal today is to be able to find out what I think it actually is today and to be able to tell you by the end of this talk. Number 2, when you arm wrestled Stephen King at Mark Twain's house, who won? This is not an intellectually serious question. I won. Stephen King is 66 years old. Number 3, can you actually roll up a frying pan with your hands? With all the weird stuff I can do, I'm freakishly strong, and I've earned it. Everybody fixates on the frying pan. Yes, I can roll up a frying pan with my hands. And number 4, this is a question I got asked yesterday on the airplane. It's a question I've been asked 5 times today in this hotel. It's a question I'll be asked tonight on the airplane is, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Now, medically, the answer to that is, I have the worst case of Tourette syndrome most of my neurologists have ever seen. Non-medically, that's a much longer discussion. But what I can tell you, the least you need to know about that part of it, is there is nothing harder for me, with all the hard things I can do, than simply being out in public. It's so hard. Never gets easier. This is not a precious moments story about someone who overcame something. I'm still in the middle of it all the time. This will give me the best chance just to frame some of the themes in the book, and then my flight got pushed back, so I have plenty of time to talk to you afterwards if you want. So come ask me questions if you want. Anybody got a personal Tourette's connection here? There are always a couple. Anyway, it is a neurological disorder that affects people generally in 1 or 2 ways. It can look and sound like a lot of different things, but it is involuntary movements and involuntary noises. You won't see a lot of mine when I talk. That's one of the reasons I talk so much, and if I am polished, that is one of the reasons why. This is kind of when I get to rest. But that's it. It kind of feels like the urge to sneeze, as bad as you've ever needed to, but it's all the time. It's everywhere. I never know what it's going to look like when I let it out or how badly it's going to hurt me. And when I let it out, the urge starts to build again immediately if it goes away at all. My parents say my symptoms started when I was 6 years old and I was at a first grade Thanksgiving play in New Mexico. And I walked out under these bright lights, and I think about this every time the next set of lights comes. Something changed. Started blinking my eyes too much, curling my lips. Nothing really changed until I was in junior high, which was the first time it became vocal for me. I was in a math class in Elko, Nevada with my peers. I would never again care about their approval as much as I would in junior high. And I was horrified to hear myself start going, it's quiet trailer. I'm stomping my foot. And a couple of the kids screamed at me to shut up. I didn't know what was going on. So I jump up and I'm crying and I go home and I tell my mom, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? She said, I don't know, but we'll find out. She took me to talk to the librarians. That was generally how it went. Yeah. In 9th grade, I was on the freshman basketball team. We were playing an away game against our most hated rivals. It came down to me on the free throw line over and over and over alone as the crowd chants, twitch, twitch, twitch. I make the free throws, we win the game, I flip the crowd off, I go out and stomp on the mascot in center court. The crowd comes out of the stands. It is this huge, idiotic scene. But on the ride home, that is when I said to my parents, I gotta know what's going on. Can we go to a doctor? 2 weeks later at the University of Utah's neurology clinic, it took them all 5 minutes to look at me and say, okay, this is Tourette syndrome. So what now? There's really no Tourette's drug. Then as now, the treatments is just kind of pills, but it's always pills for something else that might work with Tourette's. And at the time, I said, you know what, it's not a nuisance, it's just a nuisance. I'm okay, it's got a name and I can explain it. I think that will be enough unless I need to explain it better later. And I was going to need to. 19 years old, I am a pious little Mormon missionary in Washington, D.C., and I'm walking down a busy street when I suddenly hit myself in the face as hard as I can. This is just a tic. This is new. This is the same thing as the blinking, as the throat clearing, blood all over my face, blood all over my hand, blood all over my dumb little white shirt. And I start screaming, ah! Ah! I'm screaming every 2 to 3 seconds. I am scratching pieces of my face out. It's all coming from the same place, but it was so different and so wild and so sudden. I had no idea. I didn't even immediately think, this is probably that weird little thing you got diagnosed with that made you blink too much. LDS missions generally last 2 years. I went home a year early because my body started convulsing so badly so often, food couldn't stay in my stomach. I usually ask everybody what they think I weigh. Once somebody said, 160? I stopped asking. I weigh 265 pounds right now, but when I came home, I was 6'7" and I weighed 155. It was bad. Had to come home to learn how to eat. Now, this is where the strength part of it starts. My dad started taking me to the gym just so I could put some of the weight back on. In hindsight, I would learn just how good this was for me. But at the time, I just knew, this feels good, I'm starting to look a little better. And then my tics got so bad, I started screaming so hard so often, I would get hernias just from the screaming, just the pressure. It would pop, made it very hard to lift. So I couldn't hold on to that for very long. Wanted to be out in public, wanted to be able to go to school, wasn't the smartest guy, but knew enough to know I was smart. But it wasn't a question of, can I do the work? Can I go to school? Can I get a job? It was, can I go outside? Can I stand to be looked at? I usually couldn't. So I got what at the time was an experimental treatment. I started getting Botox injections in my vocal cords every 5 weeks for 2.5 years. It made it so I couldn't scream. It paralyzed the vocal cords, but it made it so I couldn't talk either. I've already told you how good talking is for me. This was a very weird shift in my identity. 2.5 years of the faintest whispering. It usually wasn't even worth the effort to try to whisper. One good thing came out of this. This is when I started to write more seriously and realized what a good thing that was for me. Next few years, incredibly dark. This is something I'm just going to touch on that's in the book. I wound up meeting in the Air Force an autistic tech force sergeant who, after a prison riot in Iraq, got a brain injury that for all intents and purposes made him autistic in that moment. His name's Adam Glass, Unbreakable Adam T. Glass. He's the one who got me into all the strongman stuff. He's the reason I can tie horseshoes in knots and rip phone books and roll up frying pans and lift 500 pounds on one finger. Sounds cool, isn't that cool? Dumb and dangerous and an expensive hobby. You know, it's broken my heart on the book tour. Nobody will come to a book event. Everyone will show up to see someone break something. So anyway, we'll leave it at there. Adam gave me some experiments to try, according to things he could see because of what we might call his autistic gifts, if that's accurate, that gave me a year without tics. Nothing. And when I sold this book, it was the book about how I'd cured myself and how I was going to do it for other people. And I could not have been more wrong, because while I was writing the book, my 2.5-year-old son started having his first tics. And that and some other things, it roared back so fast, so hard, that today at age 36, I am far worse than I ever was. My bones break, hernias, broken teeth, I bite through my tongue. None of this means I have it harder than anyone else. We've all got our things that are unbearable. Mine are just harder to ignore, and they make it hard for me to do all the things I want to. So to give you a little bit of perspective, it takes a lot more energy for me to hold the tics in than it does to have them. I'm not going to let myself hit myself or anything, but I'm going to just try to let go and not white knuckle it for about 20 seconds, just so you can get an idea of what I'm actually talking about. That's the kind of stuff I'm always fighting against. It takes so much more energy to hold it in than it does to have those kind of tics. And one of the downsides to getting so strong is it's badass to be able to move powerfully voluntarily. When it's involuntary, you pick up some really weird mileage. My joints, my body's much older than my 36 years. And I'm always uncomfortable for these reasons when this gets billed as, or I get asked, so you overcame it. How did you overcome it? It's not like that. It never gets easier. I don't think it ever will. But when people say, how do you handle it? This leads me to some more interesting answers that I've been able to explore here in this book. People say, is it because you are so strong? Is it because you are so tough? And I'm in the interesting position of being able to say, I'm usually going to be the strongest person in the room. I've spent enough time training with some very hard people. I may very well be the toughest person in any given room as far as being able to handle myself. And I can also say that when it hurts, and when I'm scared, like everybody gets, this stuff doesn't matter. It's not what does it, not ever. The things that matter are always the love we can show each other, the kindnesses we can give each other, the amount of questions we're willing to ask, compassion and curiosity. I don't know if this will make sense to anybody but me, but it's also for me. It's the way this room feels right now. It's as close to a sacred experience as I'm capable of getting these days. I love books, I love stories, and I know we don't really need each other. But right now, as I've listened to these people, as I see the way some of you are listening to me, I hope you can understand that we need each other's stories. And this, today, for me, is a story of how we all wound up in this room together. It's the story of how someone learned how to think, in my case. And thinking is what leads me to the sense of wonder, and the sense of wonder is what means I can keep asking questions. There's always another question to ask. That was something I didn't ever have before. And that is the most valuable gift we can ever give ourselves or our students. It's always urgent. It's always crucial. It's always possible. And none of that changes whether it's part of the first year experience or in the last year of any of our individual lives. It's a story about faith, about my decision to leave the LDS church that I was raised in, the terrible personal cost this has come to me in my family life. It's about books. It's a 288-page book that mentions over 200 other books. It's almost one per page. It's about so many things, and I loved it so much, but at the bottom, the things that matter are compassion, curiosity, and the worship of mischief purely for its own sake. I'm going to leave you with one more quick story, and I'll wrap up. This kind of sums it all up for me. When I was 4 years old, maybe 5, I turned and I went down the street to go play with one of my friends. But as I was walking, I stopped because I saw something on the sidewalk. It was a moth. How many of you have seen a moth before? Yeah, no way. But this moth, from wingtip to wingtip, was like 1 or 2 or 3 feet long. I can still see this moth in my head. So I ran inside and I grabbed my mom and I took her in screaming, "Mom, Mom!" And of course it wasn't there. And my mom could have reacted in so many ways. She could have said, "It wasn't ever there. Don't tell stories. I don't have time for this." So many things. And instead, she looked at me, she looked at where the moth had been, and she looked at the sky. And she said, "Where do you think it went next?" And the right question from the right teacher at the right time, the right education, in so much as it leads each of us to that sense of wonder, it can only ever have that conclusion. You can't help but wonder. And I believe that is something I can offer to the right group, unless you think this has just been totally stupid and obnoxious. This is always how it feels with me. It doesn't matter if it's 3 people or it's 10,000. I've seen it. And if you choose me, I will do my best not to just show up and cry. But no promises. So thank you. It's been a pleasure. Long live the library. Isn't it good to be us? Thank you.